There's a question here. What is the future of family businesses when the business is passed down from generation to generation? I immediately remembered a story when I read it. Last year, you and I met with friends who own a large company. Between the two of them, they have many adult children and even grandchildren already. They were writing what you could call a family constitution, spelling out who would be authorized to manage the business, who would own certain shares, and who would be responsible for what. They even described what qualities a person should have, what kind of education. They included scenarios like a family breakup, or, for example, adopted children, if that were ever to happen. They spent a huge amount of time working with lawyers on this family code. That was at the beginning of last year, and at the start of this year we met again, and they said, "We finally finished that code." And I completely understand the owner of the business. She owns it half with her husband. When she said, if we hadn't done this, and this is basically inheritance, they would have torn each other apart. And this is a family.
This is a very important point, because what does it show? It means that on some intuitive level, the parents feel they didn't give their children enough love for them to love one another out of abundance and to live peacefully and lovingly. It shows that we ourselves don't have enough inner capacity, because love can only exist from excess. If we go into business and the business controls us instead of us controlling the business, if we serve it and become expendable resources for it, then automatically we shortchange our children. And then that business, which is not built on love, will create conditions for the children to fight and clash with one another. If we put children first, because children are more important than any business, if we give them love, then the business becomes like our children as well.
Well, that's easy to say. A person who has a talent for business and builds a huge company with branches in many countries usually doesn't have much love left for the kids. And besides, this is such an abstract idea. To actually give more love, how exactly is he supposed to add it? There's another extreme, when mothers can't even leave the house. They just overprotect and smother their child.
That's exactly the point. This is a false perception.
What kind of harmony is possible here? And how do you see this taking shape in the future? Because family businesses pass down through generations. That's a natural story. It has always existed. The other issue is that some children simply refused to take on that responsibility and went into something of their own, creativity, or a completely different field, or did whatever they wanted, like surfing, for the rest of their lives, just to avoid that business because it felt like a burden. Will this generational entrepreneurship continue in the future, passing from one generation to the next?
I see that if we look at it in a healthy, balanced way, no. Because any family is about development, different spheres, constant expansion. It's like genetics. If close relatives, cousins, brothers and sisters, marry each other, after some time they will have serious health problems, genetic disorders, because they multiply. The same thing happens with business. It starts breaking people down at a deep systemic level and falling apart itself. That's why, on an intuitive level, a child knows the business is, say, automotive, but he becomes an artist. The business produces chemicals, and he decides to become a musician. He needs to be let go, because he will actually save that business by bringing new energy, new blood into the energetic field of that business. If the parents rigidly say, everyone in our family is a dentist, so you will all be dentists, then serious health and personal life problems will begin for the children, because their energy will be drained into that dentistry. We were taught to think, how amazing, he's a banker in the 10th generation. That's not true. He's the unhappiest person in the world because he's a banker in the 10th generation, or a psychic in the 10th generation. The principle is simple. We must move toward expansion, toward interest, toward something new, not toward a narrow path dictated by a genetic line.
Well, novelty is kind of guaranteed by time itself, new technologies and so on.
Yes, but it's like if we kept eating barley all the time and just changed the seasonings. Sooner or later, with honey, olives or ketchup, that barley would still start to bore us. boiled, fried, or ground, it would still be barley.
So in your view, will family enterprises in the future turn into corporate ones?
Ideally, yes. Any family business should expand to a scale that is not even earthly, but figuratively speaking, galactic.
In the family we were talking about, it's not only the children involved. They couldn't possibly give birth to enough employees. They have about 1,000 people working there. It's already a pretty big business. In that case, the code simply defines each person's share based on their work, attention, and investments. But, as you say, some offshoot descendant who went off to surf and only occasionally drops by the office might actually bring more novelty and energy than the others.
100%. A happy relative who is doing what he loves will give a family business that has existed for years or decades more opportunities and development than all those who sit in the office from morning till night.
But according to that family code, right?
Right.
He will most likely receive less inheritance than everyone else, because the assumption is that a person must invest his time, his life, his blood and sweat into the family business.
And here everything depends on how and with what we measure. It's like comparing a doctor who treated a patient for a year with pills and endless procedures, and some person in a state of love, let's call him a saint, who simply comes and says a prayer over him. The first spent a year on treatment and the patient barely recovered, and the second read a prayer and the person got well. If we pay according to the principle, the more time spent, the more money earned, it will be ineffective for planet Earth and for humanity. Then, for example, we will be going to psychologists for decades because it benefits the psychologist to keep investing time and getting paid for it. But we need to focus on effectiveness, on results. That means we will have to learn to measure love.
That was actually my burning question about the future, because the current story unfolding in politics, business, show business, and the film industry can't really be measured. Yes, we have all kinds of awards and prizes. The Oscars, for example, where contribution is supposedly recognized, yet in reality, over time, it often turns out that without one particular person, nothing would have happened at all, and the person who generated a brilliant idea or made a crucial contribution might receive absolutely nothing.
The question is a bit different. Sorry for interrupting. Let's talk on a global level. The thing is, when a person has the opportunity to create something, he usually doesn't have the capacity for anything else because a huge amount of energy has gone into one narrow direction. I've encountered this many times. There are scientists who invented something genius, but they simply don't have the capacity for money. And that's why the money ends up with the entrepreneur who took that idea and implemented it in real life. He doesn't need to spend so much energy penetrating all kinds of new spheres, grasping creative concepts, inventing something new through brainstorming and burning almost his entire life force just to receive that information. The entrepreneur simply took a systematic approach and got the maximum out of it. But there's the issue of capacity. A person had enough capacity to make a discovery, but that doesn't mean he has the capacity to be a billionaire. If we give that billion to the inventor and he not only doesn't know what to do with it, but doesn't even have the energy to distribute it, then that billion becomes extremely toxic. Most likely that person won't have the capacity to spend it properly. So we face a dilemma. We can have someone with huge capacity for money, yet he may be unable to bring anything good or useful into this life.
Yes, for example, someone who rises on hype alone, and basically arrogance becomes his main tool. There's even a saying, talents need support, mediocrity will break through on its own. That's also a toxic story.
And that's why we need to set certain rules. Those who today can make the world better and create conditions for growth should be given opportunities, even an obligation, to develop in other spheres, to attend different practices, meditations, to expand their acceptance, not just sit, roughly speaking, in front of a microscope trying to invent something wonderful for the whole world while destroying their own life by identifying solely with chemistry, for example. That's why a child needs balance from the very beginning, any child, where, besides science, there are many other interests and hobbies.
Will there ever come a time when reward arrives through love, through some kind of universal justice, when it will truly feel right and fair?
If we are talking about this now, it means we have already touched a probabilistic reality that exists. If we approach it from a semi-scientific angle, first we need to understand what science actually is. Science is limited knowledge of a group of people who perceive the world through the laws they allowed themselves to accept.
The laws they agreed upon and declared.
The laws permitted by their conservatism. Because if we developed all spheres but constantly asked, how much love is there in this, many topics would be completely shut down. They wouldn't develop at all because there is no love there, only degradation. And if they did exist, there would be countless instructions about how long and how exactly to use them, because balance must be everywhere. When we start investing too much energy in one area while the rest can't catch up, like training only the left arm in sports while the rest of the body lies idle, nothing good will come of it. So when we speak about distributing finances or well-being, we still need to consider that each person is ready only for the amount of reward, let's say money, that matches his interest and desire to spend it. That's capacity.
And it also depends on what there is capacity to spend it on.
Of course, and when we talk about a harmonious personality, these laws have always worked. They're simply intensifying now. For example, when a person becomes successful and wealthy, people who live in fears, limitations, resentment, aggression, and complexes start giving examples like the founder of IKEA or Ford, who supposedly wore one coat, the same shoes, and slept in a 2-star hotel with bed bugs. And everyone said, "What a modest, wonderful man." But in reality, that's a person who was destroying the world, making everyone poorer and creating wars and problems. Why? Because love is the development of harmony. When I look at the end of a year and see that I lost a certain amount of money, I ask myself why that loss happened. And the answer is, your financial level has reached this point. Your interests have become these and these. Therefore, your subconscious allocated money for a restaurant more expensive than the cafe you used to go to, for a better hotel room, for a higher class flight with a better airline and ticket. Because when we reach a certain level, our spoon, cup, shoes, pen, car, clothes, everything must change to match that level. And if we fly up to a high financial level while everything else degrades and suffers, what are we doing? We are destroying the world. In Europe, I met people who were said to be millionaires, very rich, yet they walked around in dirty jeans, drove an old broken BMW, lived in an old house, and used the minimum possibilities available to them. That means they have no capacity. They live in the minus. If we look at their inner state, they are in deep fear, pretending they don't need more. But that's already a deeper layer, where we need to look at the relationship between a man and a woman, how much his woman fills him, how much love, interest, excitement, drive, sexuality she has, how free she is from the past, and whether she lives not only for the children, but also for her own development and creativity. There are simply too many distortions here. Once I asked some business acquaintances to calculate how much money they had lost and where they had saved by choosing a worse option than they could afford. We always put pleasure and happiness first, of course, and the few people who were able to calculate were shocked to discover they had lost exactly the amount they could have spent on business class or a good hotel. I'm not even talking about situations when we have money, start renovations, and I suddenly begin to save without understanding why. On tiles here, on flooring there, on parquet somewhere else. It felt expensive, even though it would have fit perfectly and the money was there. What happened? We lost exactly the amount those tiles and that parquet cost.
We replaced the tiles later for exactly that amount.
No, in that case, the money went somewhere else.
Okay.
The point is, if we have that money but start saving out of fear and calculation instead of love, that money was already meant to go. God offered it to us through designers. We had the opportunity, but we hadn't grown yet. Today, we hadn't grown to tomorrow, to the next grade.
Designers must be thinking now. God speaks through my projects. Take this style.
That's why, talking to a businessman and seeing his business going downhill, I ask, when was the last time you renovated your office? He answers, never. I ask, when did you last organize training, development, salary raises, professional education for your staff? Again, never. And then we see Employees steal and work poorly, the office looks terrible, and the business is heading straight into the abyss.